This is Pistachio. She's a cane toad, the most hated amphibian in the world.
You can see hundreds, if not thousands of
invasive toxic cane toads are
prompting some councils
to wage a war on public enemy number one.
These enormous toads are infamous for their negative impact on the environment, which has led to widespread eradication efforts. Ironically, they can make excellent pets, and Pistachio, who was once an alien in Florida that would have caused havoc or been disposed of, was given a second chance at life. Since she cannot return to the wild, I've done my very best to recreate her natural jungle habitat within a spacious 6-foot vivarium. Sensational headlines paint these toads as demons, but despite the issues they cause, they don't mean any harm and didn't ask for this. They're simply living, which isn't an issue in South and Central America where they originate, because predators adapted to their poison keep their populations in check. The issue is in other parts of the world, where they were introduced 100 years ago as pest control for sugar farms. Since then, they've decimated native fauna and poisoned animals that tried to eat them. A small measure that helps mitigate these happenings is for them to be kept responsibly as pets, especially in places they can't naturalize. Pistachio has been a Pennsylvania girl under my care for over 2 years now. Since she's from the wild, getting her used to my presence hasn't been as easy as most of my other animals who are captive bred. There's been some progress, but I know moving her into a proper setup will change everything. I've worked with many animals over the years, and it's always apparent when they're comfortable with me. This is essential because I want them to understand I don't mean any harm and I'm simply part of their environment. All that's to say, it tends to happen faster in large naturalistic enclosures, like the one I'm about to build, which allow for the broadest range of behaviors and not necessarily more human exposure. Pistachio is a wild animal in the subtropics of Florida, so she's never actually seen her natural environment. That's what I wanted to replicate, but finding any documentation of these toads where they actually belong is really challenging. However, I know they live in the Amazon basin and other areas in Central America, so that's the environment I decided to mimic. These toads like to soak in water, which is no surprise considering where they originate. Including a proper water feature made sense because constantly cleaning out a water bowl like I have been doing for years is annoying and wouldn't look as good. Cane toads are the largest toads in the world, with females attaining a length of up to 12 inches. Pistachio here has a lot of growing left to do, but even at this adolescent size, she's much larger than most of the toads native to North America, which partly explains why they're so detrimental. I'm usually not a fan of just putting a divider in the tank. They tend to look sloppy from the front, but it was the best solution here. Anyway, she'll spend much of her time being active on the land, so I kept it large. To be honest, I've never had a DIY aquarium leak, and I've built many of them, so I rarely do a water test. However, the same hasn't been true for partitions. The issue has been that glass squeezes out most of the silicone, causing the seam to fail. Since adding bumpers, which I did here, I haven't had any problems, but doing a test for good measure never hurts. Using scrap materials is kind of the theme here. The partition was salvaged from an old tank, and I've been accumulating foam scraps that I've slowly made use of. Building a foundation from these was challenging because I didn't want a massive foam and the pieces weren't ideal. Instead, I created boxes and angular shapes to build a rough configuration on the glass. Perfection wasn't the goal, but what I wished to make was the foundation for a rocky face, complete with a running waterfall. I used this image as a reference. Having hollow rocks ensured the structure would remain lightweight and made running the filter's return simple. All the meticulous work paid off, but this was only a dry fit. I crossed my fingers and hoped to get it looking this good again the second time while adhering them with silicone. The rocks would be the primary feature, but I wanted them to appear as though they're surrounded by dirt and roots to simulate the jungle aesthetic. Believe it or not, this sloppy looking foam thing is the perfect foundation for precisely that. I recently began using vertical concrete to craft backgrounds. I hadn't done anything this complicated because I was still getting used to the materials. I knew more work would be involved and there was a higher risk of failure, but I was ready for this challenge. That said, even this background was more straightforward than others I have planned. Anyway, I had to work in steps to make this happen, beginning with the rocks. The default color was perfect for this application, so I just mixed it up and got to work. I was careful to arrange the foam as I did based on the reference image, but I had to be even more mindful of how I built up concrete. I'd be carving it in no time, so I had to imagine how it would appear with missing material, water flowing over it, and covered with plants. That's the artistry behind nature design and a skill I've developed over time. Visualizing the final result before starting helps set me in the right direction. Admittedly, they never turn out as expected because I adjust the designs as they unfold, but having a vision makes all the difference. Using inspiration helps too, in this case an image. However, I find that trying to replicate things exactly takes out the fun. The freeform approach allows me to get in a flow state, which keeps me motivated throughout the tedious tasks. What I love about this technique though is the carving process. This material lends itself well to the types of texture you imagine in nature, like wood, stone, and mud. With a simple trowel, the outer layers slump off and just kind of reveal the desired textures. I'm not sure how else to explain it. I've made foam rocks and used natural stones to create waterfalls, but simply carving it out of this was just so satisfying in comparison. I think that's because I had complete control over the material. Even so, this process is very time consuming and a labor of love, because it took well over 8 hours to carve. I know I'll be able to create better sculptures as I develop this skill, but even now I love the results. The textures were great, but staining the surface with glazes to add color would make all the difference. With various hues at my disposal, I was able to accentuate the details and make the surface appear weathered. Rocks are never a solid color. They're stained, contain mineral deposits, and have other features which cause variations. Adjusting the colors and adding details like faux iron deposits are what I feel truly make this appear genuine. Applying these wets the surface, so the actual coloration wasn't showing, but I knew what I applied and where. I just had to trust the process. As a final measure, I scuffed the surface to create highlights. When I think of the jungle, I always imagine some type of wood, whether trees, fallen branches, or roots. The space on the right was perfect for a root ball structure or something of that nature. So when I mixed up the second batch of concrete, I added a brown pigment. Forming this around everything I've added thus far brought it together in a big way. You know I'm a man about the details and had to add little roots throughout. Seeing how these looked alongside the other elements as the dirt texture emerged was incredible. However, something was off when it dried because it was almost purple. That was the same issue I had in my African Bullfrog's recent Paludarium build, which uses many of the same techniques. I'll link that up in the description if you want to see what I did there. Anyway, I thought the rust coloration, which used a glaze I didn't have before, could help with this. Definitely good input from Steven and Gar, who recommended adding red last time the dirt was off, because that's what I did here, and it worked well. I go into all of these builds a little differently based on the animals. This would be a jungle vivarium, so false bottom was required. However, Pistachio digs, so it had to be one she couldn't disturb, and it had to be drainable. Sometimes I drill through the tank, but I thought a standpipe was a better option. Details like this can be easily overlooked, but make these setups run better and easier in the long run. Ideally, I want to intervene and tamper with this as little as possible. I do nearly everything alone here and have to improvise when making these big tanks. Covering the sides of the tank was a bit of an afterthought, but it needed done and there was no time to waste. Regardless of what I do, I always like to clean these backgrounds before adding life. That gave me a quick preview of the waterfalls, which I enjoyed, but I had to stay focused. I still had to make the false bottom tamper-proof, and the ideal material for that was Matala mat. I'm sad to see them go, because these are all that remain from the original DIY pond I built 5 years ago. Anyway, the panels fit tightly in this space, so it all just kinda worked as is. I just had to fill a small void in the front and foam around the standpipe. A DIY technique that's been invaluable for me over the years is making screens. They're literally just window screens made to the specifications of the tank's frame. I will say though that in the past I've used fiberglass mesh. It's easier to stretch, but it doesn't hold up as well as aluminum, so I've switched to that. Either way, the process is pretty straightforward. However, I had to trim off some of the driftwood before they could be installed. Proper substrate is always an essential component that I adjust from build to build based on the goal. This mix had to retain humidity, allow for burrowing, and provide stability for the plants. Just mixing it up doesn't make it bioactive though. It's the addition of tiny organisms and development of things like bacteria and fungi that bring the environment to life. It takes time for all of that to happen, but I keep bins of seasoned substrate on deck, which are cycled with bacteria and contain critters like earthworms, springtails, and isopods. The plants would serve a crucial role in this process as well, but I couldn't add them until I installed the glass tracks. I've typically used silicone for this, but my friend Troy Goldberg, who specializes in dart frog vivariums, recommended mounting tape instead. That's what I did here, and I gotta say it was much easier and apparently holds up better. The challenge with these larger animals is that they can ruin plants. Luckily, Pistachio is still pretty small, so I can take more liberties now and adjust things as she grows. However, I think that setting up the foundation for a dense canopy is a viable long-term plan. Theoretically, she won't go in this area, and the plants will be well established when she's large enough to disturb them if she tries. Plus, I know that all the overhead coverage will help her feel secure. I did add a few plants to the substrate as well, but I don't intend to keep them there. I ordered a few ferns that she'd naturally encounter that were meant for those locations. Of course, they didn't arrive on time, and I had to finish this project, so I'll just fix it later. On a side note, if you made it this far in the video, are new to the channel, and enjoy this sort of thing, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss out on future uploads. For those who have watched the channel for years and continue to support what I do, you know I appreciate every last one of you. As I said before, I've had Pistachio for over 2 years. I waited so long to do this because I didn't want to invest in making something elaborate until she grew. She also spent longer in quarantine in a different room for biosecurity purposes since she was wild caught. That said, even though I haven't shown her before, this isn't the first time I've ever mentioned her. I also got all of my isopods in the other room just through there, and we got Pistachio, but I haven't shown her yet, so that's for another time. Anyway, I was curious about the waterfalls. How would they flow? Once the canister filter expelled the air, it flowed like a champ. Maybe even a little too strong, but that's better than the other way around. Nothing a little moss couldn't fix. I can't wait to see how it looks as it establishes on the rocky structure. I feel that it's pretty much an obligation for setups intended to mimic the jungle to include a covering of leaf litter and botanicals. They just look correct while also serving an essential function. This covering is an ideal refuge for the organisms that ensure these setups thrive. Here they can process waste into nutrients for the plants without becoming food themselves. Seeing it all come together was a joy. Although it's not seasoned yet, is missing a few key components and requires a few adjustments, I think it does look like a proper jungle landscape. On the right is a densely planted forest with plenty of hiding places. I'll have to thin this out and change a few things as she grows. Meanwhile, the left side opens up into a rocky jungle waterfall and pooling area. With beneficial bacteria growing on the sand and within the canister filter, this can all be easily maintained to ensure she always has access to clean water. That's all good and well in theory, but in practice, what would Pistachio actually think of her new home? Finally, seeing Pistachio in a proper vivarium is fantastic. Even so, she's still quite unsure of my presence, and I'm sure that will continue for the foreseeable future. I want her to feel as comfortable as possible, and I believe that living and growing in this jungle vivarium in an active area of the room should allow her to ease up sooner than later. Although this doesn't solve the cane toad issue at large, at least this one is free to live its life safely without being a potential menace. I'm so excited to see her thrive and grow in here and to share that with you. If you enjoyed the project and want to see similar builds, I've linked up a few I think you'll enjoy. Until next time, Serpa Squad, take care and peace.